Big thanks to Dallin Pepper for doing that. Love the Marvel part.
Yes.
By the way, that was fantastic. Let's bring in Lauren Khalil.
Come on.
and Brian Friend. Lauren, were you lost during that portion of the interview? Did you just like take check out
that was
mentally?
the time where I just kind of thought about my life choices and why I'm so out of touch with these things. And I guess I just need to bite the bullet and start watching that kind of stuff so I can be relevant.
Well, yeah. Get ready. It's a long walk. Yeah, you're going to spend some time getting through that. So I'm just talking about phase 1 through 12. What are we on? What phase are we on now?
I mean, well, Lauren tried to get an out by asking Dallin if his wife enjoyed them, and then Dallin was like, actually, my wife got me into them. You could just see Lauren's heart sink.
That just backfired.
Well,
but it's not too late. It's not too late. TIF is the example. You can pick it up anytime you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
That's right.
did.
Start with Iron Man. Just go watch Iron Man and then go from there.
Mm-hmm.
That was 2000. When did that come out? 2007? That's how long that franchise has been going on.
Oh, yeah.
That's nuts. All right. Anyway, let's get into some of the news items and some of the discussion items we wanted to talk about today. The first is we have another drug test update. Doesn't affect anybody going to the CrossFit Games. And if you did not know where to look or you do not know where to look, you probably missed it.
Yeah. So last week, there was, I believe on Thursday, they published that Trent Williams, who was a member of the third place team in Africa, 10-star hybrids, basically provided a sample that had clomipene, and he has received a 4-year sanction. So the whole process was, I guess, buttoned up already. So as a third athlete from semifinals so far, two from Africa, and this one was pretty straightforward, and his 4-year sanction starts on May 21st.
And we're only now a couple weeks away, and we have yet to hear anything that involves a games qualifier at any level, right?
Yeah. And
any we haven't heard anything about any qualifying teams.
Yeah, at least
just the one
nothing
from,
that I've
one from Africa.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. And it was interesting because Trent has competed as an individual the past couple of years, and this is his first time as a team, and this is the first time he was actually where I would say like in the scope of athletes that could be tested.
Mm-hmm.
Like 10th or 11th in Africa is probably just outside that window of like how far you would go down, seeing as they only get one invite. And so now I think this is, not to get too far into it, but I feel like this is what a lot of people argue might be the case, is you have a lot of these people on the outside, on the peripheral of what the testing reaches down to that could be using, we don't know. That's applying something retroactively that we can't necessarily prove, for us in Trent's case, but I think that this certainly feeds that narrative.
Yeah. But you would think that, look, if we're going to get any announcements that involve qualifiers or anything like that, they've got to come out like now to give whoever the backfill is a chance to figure things out, right? I mean,
we're getting close. I don't know that,
right?
Yeah, backfills would even logistically be able to go. But I do wonder if like those people on the cusp have like proactively booked tickets, maybe not gone as far as like booking flights, but maybe if they're in driving location, have like hotels or accommodations ready, just because we're so close that it's such a shame when every year you see athletes who can't logistically get there because there just isn't enough time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that in the past too, I believe this has happened behind the scenes where ahead of something being announced, the athlete that would be in line to receive the invite has been contacted ahead of time and been let know that like, hey, this is something that you should be aware of. Be ready in anticipation of the actual formal announcement. So even though we may not know something, some wheels could have been turning behind the scenes.
True.
That's been the case in the past. There's no guarantee that's the case now, but hopefully if someone does come out with a positive test that we haven't heard of yet, that was the case, and that's how at least they handled it, because the last thing you want someone not be able to go because of a timing discrepancy. But
all right, next thing is we got the Rogue Q for the Invitational has been announced. Those dates, August 25th through the 28th. That is the qualifier for athletes that don't receive an invitation directly out of the CrossFit Games. And then that's something that's going to run at the same time as the Q and actually run longer is the C, which is now a community event. I think this is the first time they've done something like this.
I think so, and it's being programmed by Street Parking, so they're a real like community oriented type engagement piece for people that want to. I also think it's. I'd be curious to see if this also helps feed the prize purse for the individuals.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
And, anytime you hear street parking, or at least anytime I do, I think minimal equipment. And I'll be curious to see if there's any overlap from the Q to the C in terms of the programming, if there might be maybe one test that's part of both competitions. And that might be a cool feature as well, that they can have, you can actually do the C and still see how you stack up against the Q, or maybe they'll have more tests that overlap. I'm not sure.
Well, see, now Brian is the master of the segue, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, because the one thing we want to talk about is we actually have some now information on what will be seen at the CrossFit Games. Helen.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Division is going to do some sort of version of this.
Yeah.
So which is, I think the last time now, and this is the assumption. No, I don't want to make an assumption, but if you were to do it as prescribed, you would have kettlebell swings. And we have not seen kettlebell swings at the games since 2011. Was it the end 1, 2, and 3?
1, 2, and 3. Yeah. And we actually had a variation of Helen at the games the year prior, Pyramid Double Helen.
Okay.
In 2010, which is done out at the track, and was the second event of the weekend, I believe. Yes.
And it lead straight into a heavy shoulder to overhead. Is that correct?
It was a two.
That type of thing is, clearly something that Adrian is very keen on, is these kind of back-to-backs, and knowing the history and knowing that workout in its other iteration or version at the CrossFit Games fed into a heavy test. And, if you're programming Helen correctly, it should be emphasis on the run. Everything else can be challenging, but doable for the field. And it's how hard you want to push that run. And that would just cater so well to his pattern of programming to follow it up with something heavy right afterwards. So we'll see.
But I really hope that Helen for individuals is programmed as prescribed. Like, I want to see the best of the best. What are the times? And then let affiliates be able to program this at their gym. And Justin Madero's time is X. How close to that can you get? I don't want to see other movements or iterations.
I'm on the other
I'm the other side of that one as well. But and I'll tell you.
So, okay, let's debate it. Here we go, boys.
Because here's the question I wanted to ask all of you when they say that, because I believe the verbiage is a variation. What would you change in here? And let's just talk for the elite individuals. Let's focus on them. What, if anything, would you change, or how would you tweak this for a games format?
Well, I think the key word is change, right? It is the change and evolution of the athletes at the games and in the community over time. When Helen was first programmed, it was about as Brian said, nowadays you want to program it because it becomes more how hard you push the run. But back in the day, it wasn't always assumed that hey, you're going to be able to do everything unbroken. If you push the run, there were times people come falling apart at the grips, and before butterfly pull-ups were ubiquitous in the community, that it might look a little different on the back end, especially in that third round. If you're looking cross-eyed when you come in from the last 400 meter. I think in this scenario, and I liken it very much to Mary at the games in 2019, why I don't think that was necessarily the best test overall. Is I think there's a certain point where these benchmark workouts, the elite athletes have evolved to a point where it's no longer a question of if all of these athletes are pushing the threshold to the max and they've got it redlined the entire way. Does that allow for any sort of separation based on execution, based on fitness, outside of the little things of hey, for me, for example, I can do kettlebell swings. I can do 21 kettlebell swings unbroken as fast as I can, ripping it up, ripping it down, shortening the arc of my arms so much so that I'm tucking my elbows and hands to my chest to shorten it. And I still can't do them as fast as other people. And in that situation, it's not really about fitness. It's about body structure. And I know that that's always going to be the case in some elements, but I think that we've kind of tapped out the potential for that in some ways, at least for Helen, where I think the individuals might need something a little bit beefier.
And just
Okay, so hear me
before we
out.
go
Hear
any,
me out.
let me just tell everybody what
Okay.
Helen is, just in case you don't know. 3 rounds, 400-meter run, 21 kettlebell swings, 1.5/1 pood, so men and women there, and then 12 pull-ups. That's Helen. Go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, so there's so many ways that you could change this. You could make the kettlebell heavier. You could change the pull-ups to muscle ups, but I want to see it exactly as it is there, and then potentially a 2-minute rest, and then Helen in reverse. So essentially like doing it twice, but like Helen as it is, rest 2 minutes, then Helen again, but start with the pull-ups, then go to kettlebell swings and end with the run.
And then it's combined time.
Lauren, would you envision that as 1 or 2 scores?
Oh, now we're getting too detailed. I don't have those answers.
Because resting 2 minutes is are you resting 2 minutes from the end of your workout or from the end of a fixed time cap?
Fixed time cap.
Yeah.
So everyone does the workout. There's I don't know.
So there's an
8 or 9 minute
yeah.
cap, and then at the 10 or 11 minute mark they start again.
Yes, because I want to see people finishing that run and like that race.
Well, to end with the run would be, that would be fun for sure. But they could, if you're talking about a variation or a version of Helen, there's a million different things you could do. You could just do reverse Helen, where you just, you invert the order of operations if you want to end with a run. I've heard many people suggest things like, double kettlebell snatch, increase the difficulty of the snatch, or a bar muscle up, increase to a gymnastics that is doable but challenging for sets of 12. And obviously you can layer these things on top of each other. You could make it longer by making the run longer. You could do more rounds of Helen. But if you don't want to change the structure, you could do 6 rounds instead of 3. And then, when they say that everyone's doing it, you just have to start thinking about what are variations that the older masters divisions can do. What could you possibly do with teams with Helen? How are you going to restructure that for various adaptive divisions? And I think a lot of people's mind went to rinse and repeat last year, where they had one test that everyone at the CrossFit Games did. And so I'll be curious to see if that's what they're going for here with Helen, or if these things do look dramatically different based on the capacity across different divisions.
Let me tell you what I would do. All right. I have always thought that kettlebell swings have, since 2011, have not been a part of the open or semifinals or any stage of competition because they're just way too hard to judge. There's, to your point, Tommy, there's ways you can essentially kind of clean and jerk it.
Yeah.
You can. So what I would do is I would replace the kettlebell swing with like a bag over the bar, like they do in strongman. So you're doing the same motion, but you got to throw it over a bar 21 times.
Oh.
And that way it's like, I don't care how you do it. It's just, you got to swing it from below here. You got to throw it. And as long as it clears the bar, that's a good rep. So it eliminates all this where you extended at the top, any of that. It's just get it over the bar 21 times, find a height and a weight that is challenging, but doable. And maybe like 3 bars that line the field on the North Park. And every 7 you just advance and you take off, and then you take off to the pull-up bar. And then maybe you increase the complexity. You go regular pull-up, chest to bar, bar muscle up. But I would get rid of the kettlebell swing and I would replace it with some sort of similar movement, but over the bar, like they do in strongman.
Maybe Sean, maybe those bags by every 7 also get 10 pounds heavier.
Yes, that would be awesome.
40,
That'd be something
7
like
at
that.
50, 7 at 60, or the bar gets higher. So there's a lot of variations of that you could weave in there. That would be kind of cool. One thing that I was thinking about when I saw this was kind of the opposite and more of this, harder isn't always harder. Sometimes you can make things simpler and make them harder. Now, this would make it harder in terms of execution, but also probably more difficult with judging standards that you're concerned about, Sean, is to make the pull-up some kind of strict pull-up, which we also haven't seen in competition before. And
that would be,
from the judging perspective, I think that's why you're
strict,
making that noise. But if you could find a
remember the strict,
that's easy to judge, like your toes have to remain in front of the bar the entire time. That's just an example. The strict pull-up does test strength in a different way than any of these dynamic gymnastics movements do.
Well, I think this comes back to what are some of the intended stimuluses of Helen way back when it was programmed, right? You want to run hard, get a high heart rate, a lot of basically upper body pulling, a little bit of hip hinging, and a lot of grip work. back in the day, one of the limiting factors for Helen was grip. It wasn't. It was like, hey, I might be able to pull this whole way, but the small muscles start to fatigue out once I get with that high heart rate. So I think in some ways you still have to try and maintain that stimulus. I like the bag idea, but I don't know if it holds the same like grip stimulus that you want now to be tested at the highest level. Some people have talked about the double kettlebell as a way to make the judging more clear, right? Just because the finished position for a double kettlebell snatch is a little bit more cut and dry than a kettlebell. And for anyone that was around back then, like part of the reason why kettlebells essentially went away from testing in some capacity was there were some pretty serious like issues with judging. You go 2011 Mid-Atlantic Regional, AJ Moore. That weekend, it was actually one of the first events second weekend I think I ever worked for CrossFit directly. He was winning the competition. It didn't look like he was just going to qualify. He was blowing the competition away. And he got somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 no reps on kettlebell swings during that original hundreds workout, to the point where his hands became shredded. And it was the only time that I've seen where I thought would have been a fight and a brawl breakout at a CrossFit event, like in the crowd. He got no reps so many times that he dropped down the leaderboard. It pretty much kind of knocked him out of not just of winning, but out of contention, period. And it wrecked the rest of his weekend because you had Amanda shortly after that. You had a nasty chipper that had a ton of grip in it. His hands were ripped to shreds. And when the judge went to ask him to sign it, he told her, and I was standing right there, I can't sign it because of my hands. And he shook her off with his head. The crowd took that as I'm protesting. No, I don't want this. And it got to the point where Jeff Tincher had to get on the microphone and lay down the law a little bit publicly over the PA system back in the day. And it got a little hairy. People followed people out into the parking lot.
Sheesh.
It was bad, but there was, in many ways, there was an argument that if you looked at his kettlebell swings, some of those like across the board swings of that nature were getting let go. And that's always going to be the argument when people get upset about no reps. But it was just really tough to judge. And getting the kettlebell, the bottom of the kettlebell vertical, there's a lot of little wiggle room for the gray area there, especially when you're moving and operating at speed specifically, and the speed that these guys are going at. So I mean the judging and the standards are going to have to be crystal clear for sure. But I think if you can maintain that intended stimulus and make it difficult to where it's a test that is really going to push these elite athletes, and it's not just a given like everyone's going unbroken, everyone's dropping the hammer, and then like who does this line up for with like range of motion and the sweet spot is good, then I think, okay, then, it's a lot better, because there is an argument to be made that a lot of the classic benchmarks as written aren't appropriate tests for the elite anymore.
Yeah. The other like really important thing for all of us who are speculating about what this could look like to consider is they know the rest of the tests. And so there are certain things that we might be talking about that it's like, well, there's no chance that's coming because just wait until X or Y day or whatever. And they also can weigh the potential for a workout to be skewed by range of motion, for example, against another test that might be showing up, right after it or the next day.
Okay, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Maybe it will just be straight down the middle, Helen. We'll compare how every group does it. But I'm guessing there's going to be.
I think there'll be a couple
kind of a twist.
I think there might be a couple groups that will do it because I think there is still value. Like, I would love to see what, like, you go 50 plus up into it and seeing some of those athletes hammer it if it's the final day competition or something like that. Maybe even seeing some of the teenage divisions do it as prescribed. Some of them might not have ever done it before, which is crazy to think. It was.
I've never done Helen.
That's a good point. Really?
What?
Yeah.
Tomorrow. You're doing it tomorrow.
Exactly.
Okay, give me some scores to chase.
Let's see. Look it up.
I think if you go
first sub 7 minutes.
First sub 7, that's like essential CrossFit watching.
I think if you're around like 9 minutes, like that 9 minutes I think is a great score for just you're walking in the gym once a day doing one work. Like if you get that, that's good. Anywhere sub 10, I think you're you're doing just fine.
I mean, that video go back and watch that video, Lauren, because there's so much that just might not make sense to you because of who's in that video and who's like. I think Tony Budding's running around with a Steadicam
I think
at
right,
the original gym, and everybody's like fired up to potentially watch the first sub 7. And it was just like at the time you felt like you were watching the limits of human performance go down. And that video is just I always watch that video before we do talent. I've probably done Helen 40 times.
I haven't done that many times.
That was at least.
That's a wheelhouse for you, though.
He's a good runner, but Chase loves Helen also. It's one of his favorite workouts, and he's done it a bunch as well. But I'll say this to Tommy's point from earlier: the first probably half dozen times I did Helen, I just kept failing on the last 3 pull-ups every time.
Yep,
and then eventually evolved beyond that capacity.
Yeah, it's no, for sure. And it was also, I think, for a lot of people in the early days, if you're like, I need something that is, in that, what we call like the sweet spot for Metcons, a lot of the times that 9 to 12 minute range. I need something that I can do quickly. Maybe doesn't have a ton of equipment in it. And as far as like the warm up, if outside of a little bit of shoulder stuff, you can just jump right in and do it. Like, hey, I'm not really sure what I'm doing today. Helen, like throw it out there, and you're not going to get shortchanged whatsoever as far as like having your heart beat out of your throat. I think that was a pick for a lot of people. Sometimes it's just like, hey, I just need something quick and dirty.
All right. Well, speaking of the games, Dave Castro, has been more active he's always active on social media, and he's been talking a lot more about games and games related things on his YouTube channel. Posted something. I think it was Austin, Texas. Maybe dropping a hint as far as who might be on the. You brought this to our attention, Lauren. Brought maybe a hint as far as who might be on the demo team. I know that's always a hot topic, is who's gonna be out there as part of the demo team, because that crew gets put through the ringer. Like, that's not an easy job being on the demo team.
Yeah, and it's in many ways it's almost like a primer. Like, you want to be a games athlete?
Yeah, okay.
You're gonna get to feel a little bit of it without the glory, and sometimes you may have to test these you have to test these tests. I don't like that.
No, by the way, they're calling them tests again.
Yeah, you're gonna have to
calling them tests. I'm sorry to everybody in advance, but apparently that's what we're going with. So.
Yeah. You're going to have to do these tests multiple times to play with them a little bit, because there are some things that they put the finishing touches on in person in Madison. And so it's almost kind of like a trial, a baptism, except instead of holy water, they're, I don't know, battery acid or something like that. But yeah, so I and for a lot of times it's like you get to see people make that jump, right? Yeah. Like James Sprague was on it last year. You see a lot of athletes make that jump from year to year. Or if a games athlete misses it one year, it's another way that they can stay involved.
So it was Brooke Wells he was with, and who's the
and
other
Hannah
one?
Black.
Hannah Black.
So,
which I could see Hannah being on the demo team.
Hannah makes a lot of sense, and traditionally speaking, they're looking for 3 men and 3 women, and they're looking for, in a lot of cases, to make sure there's an athlete that's strong enough, to make sure there's an athlete that can test capacity, to make sure there's an athlete that can test the high skill gymnastics stuff. And I think that Hannah certainly fits at least one of those bills. The real devastating part of being on the demo team is that you have to test the team workouts as well. Because if it was just testing individual workouts, I think it would be okay. When you layer in the team testing, because individual testing, they might only need 1 male or 1 female to do it. Maybe they'll have someone else tested to just see, okay, well, what about the power athlete? How are they going to do with this pirouette or whatever it is? But the team workout, like 2/3 of you are doing it no matter what, pretty much. And there's not a lot of area for hiding.
And a lot of them haven't been training that mode, right? Like, you talk to team athletes, it's a slightly different variation in terms of like this sprint, rest, and then suddenly you have to be able to come together and operate as a unit, and that just that drains on you in a different way.
What was the year? Was it 2015 or 16 where they had the rescue sled for the teams? Remember in the swim they had to?
Oh yeah,
the demo team had to do that.
Yeah,
that's. Like you're talking about, like, this is not. I did not sign up for this, and now I'm attached to this I think that was still back in the. Was that still 4 teams?
So we had
I think that was still teams of 6 back then,
we had
right?
teams of
So-
6 up through 2016. It's like, all right, we've got the whole team here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just see bubbles coming up from over by the pier.
Remember who your buddy is.
Do you think they'll ever go back to teams of 6?
No chance.
No way.
Okay.
I think it would be more likely. I think it would be more likely that they go to teams of 3 men and 3 women than to go to teams of 6 combined.
Yeah, and I think the only way they would go to a team of 6 is if they brought something back like the Invitational, where they expanded on the format. They allowed you to have, you had 6 people on the roster. You'd have to pick 4 to work together sometimes, maybe sometimes all 6, something like that, to where it's like, we're not trying to test fitness. We're just having a cool competition.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way I see that coming back. But it's already chaos on the field anyway, if you're trying to be a spectator, and you're going to now add.
You are not kidding.
It's a controlled riot out there. So yeah, teams of 4. I don't think that's going anywhere, but in maybe in a special circumstance, possibly. Okay, last thing wanted to talk about. And this was a post that the PFAA made recently, and it has to do with, now of course I can't get through my.
I got it.
All right. This has to do with, it's an athlete update. It was titled, they wrote on their Instagram, following semifinals, we conducted a survey to best understand the athlete experience and focus on what matters most. That feedback drove our next steps. We compiled a list of conditions athletes require for the upcoming 2023 games and provided as many individual athletes as possible the opportunity to review and accept or reject the requirements. 41 of 80 individual athletes directly signed in support of the requirements, with another 16 whose coaches/agents expressed support. Athletes requested anonymity. We met with CrossFit to review athletes' requirements and request their support. The CrossFit team recognized the athletes' feedback and expressly agreed, and that's in bold, to the following. And there's a list of 6 things here. Lake water test results. Okay, great. Climbing rope length. I'm going to list through these and I'm going to go through my questions. Oversight of approved equipment. Consistent warm-up equipment for all heats. Consistent movement standards for all heats. Clear and specific briefings on minimum work requirements. So the first one, okay, I think we all understand where that's coming from. Climbing rope length. I guess they're just going to agree on a standard length for climbing ropes now. Is that?
Or if they're touching the floor for like legless.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that this is like those two, the first 2 are pretty straightforward. Obviously, there's been a history of some concerns with the lake water, and the climbing rope just basically directly, correlates back to the Scott Panchik incident from a couple years ago. So I think that those are pretty straightforward, and CrossFit would say, yeah, those are pretty obvious.
I don't understand number 3, oversight of approved equipment. Is that from like a third party comes in and and looks at the equipment, or what is? I'm just fuzzy on that one.
I think it's the least obvious of the 6 because it's just vague language, and I'm not even going to try to speculate on. I think that this is be great to ask Brent.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, because I don't know if they wanted to bring in a third party or if there was if there's some, I don't know.
The one thing that came to mind when I thought of this is that if there is a discrepancy, there is some sort of way to elevate this beyond just a I say this is not approved. I say this is, well, we're CrossFit, you're wrong kind of thing,
My instinct with all of these is, okay, where is this coming from? And my thought process went to the air runners from semifinals as a piece of equipment that there wasn't really a way to say is, after all of the evaluation that they've done, they kind of said, oh no, there's a certain amount of air that's allowed, and then there's something that's outside of that air. So if there's, a piece of equipment, whether it's a machine or anything else that is either new or potentially inaccurate for whatever reason, that there's some process for communicating what is acceptable and what's not within the scope of that piece of equipment. That's the best I could come up with.
Mm-hmm.
I took this as personal equipment, knee wraps, grips, things
Okay.
like that.
I
And
didn't even think of that.
and this kind of came across as like a CrossFit dropped this grip length thing in the middle of the season. So there has to be some sort of oversight around when those rules can be made, how they're made, and in competition when they get inspected, like, is there a way to appeal or make your case if there is a discrepancy? And it's not like we joked with Death by, it's not just Hobart running around with a pair of scissors and just cutting people's
I just
grips.
picture him in a Brutus the Barber Beefcake tech outfit with like some comically large pruning shears, just going after
Well,
grips.
and
that
I
would be
think
my-
Tommy is probably right here, because in the
Yeah.
second list that we're going to get to, they list something called equipment calibration, and that
I
might
was
be
gonna bring
more in
that up,
lines
yeah.
of what I was thinking about. Additionally, the oversight of approved equipment is something that I've had personal conversations with Brent Fikowski about, and I know that it's something he's been pretty forward in terms of trying to come to an agreement with CrossFit upon belts, knee sleeves, etc., and that he doesn't feel that there's been consistent application of the expectations across all stages of competition throughout the seasons. So I'm going to go with Tommy on this one. Actually, I think that makes a lot more sense.
That makes the most sense there. But then you get to 4, consistent warm up equipment for all heats. And my question would be: is when has it not been
So
consistent?
4 and
Does
5.
that mean like? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so 4 consistent warm-up equipment for all heats and 5 consistent movement standards for all heats. These are things that have been not intentionally introduced to competition by CrossFit, but have like kind of occasionally been kind of organic issues that have arisen. So, and sometimes, I know that these have sometimes even been a case outside of competition, where, for example, at Wadapalooza one year, they had a bunch of athletes waiting, and then there was a speech that went a little bit longer than was intended, and then the athletes ended up waiting there for an inappropriate amount of time relative to the task they're being asked to do, and it was also different than the subsequent heats amount of time that they had to wait around. So it could be as much simple as that in terms of consistent warm-up equipment or the process leading into that. There's been other times where they've had to do a heavy lift and there hasn't been a platform provided for athletes to lift, and someone's complained about it, and then they've brought a platform and a barbell for the next heats to lift prior to that.
Okay.
And so these types of situations. And for the movement standards, this is pretty tricky. This really comes down to how well prepared the judges are. Because what inevitably happens in local competitions all the way through the highest level of competition is that the standards are briefed to the judges and the standards are briefed to the athletes, and heat 1 of whatever male, female team, whatever it is, takes the floor, and the standards are not being administered uniformly by either relative to what was briefed or across all the lanes on the floor. And as the head judge, it's your job to kind of make a decision at that moment. Am I going to gather all the judges that are judging this event and remind them of what the standard is and make sure that they're executing that correctly for the subsequent heats? Or am I not going to say anything because otherwise heat 1 has an advantage over the rest of the heats because they were able to skirt the lines here or in some lanes, but the rest of them are going to be held to a higher standard. So this one is tricky. I think that it is a great thing to strive for, but it really, really comes down to how well prepped the judges are, not the athletes.
Yeah, because if you've ever sat in on an athlete briefing, and I'm just going to use Chuck Carswell as an example. I've been in a lot of the briefings that he's given to athletes. I've never left one of those briefings being like, man, I don't understand what's being asked here, and I don't understand what the standards are. But to your point, Brian, how that gets communicated to the athletes, and let's just assume that we communicated to the judges at the same time, so everyone hears the same message. Even though they heard the same message, they might interpret it differently. And then when you get out on the floor, that's where the problem is. It's like, how does that then ultimately administered? Great thing to strive for. Glad they've codified it here. But I don't know, again, like what the concrete steps that you can take to ensure this. And this seems more symbolic to me.
Well, I think, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand when we were discussing this before the show, part of the process of being held accountable for stuff like this is codifying it expressly in the first place, right? I guarantee you, if you walked up to any CrossFit judge, head judge, representative, whatever, and you're like, hey, does CrossFit have consistent warm-up equipment for all heats, consistent movement standards, clear and specific briefings on minimum requirements? Like, yeah, of course. Like, why wouldn't we? Well, it's like, okay, but where does it expressly say that? So if you don't have it, then we can hold your feet to the fire.
That's a good point.
And they're like, well, it doesn't need to be. It's just obvious. And that may have been fine early on, but I think we're getting to the point now where like you need to, like you said, you need to codify all these things so that ultimately people can be held accountable and be, you know, and there is I don't know, part of it like putting it out there in the universe too on CrossFit.
For sure. Yeah.
I think there's, you know, the fifth one here, the consistent movement standards. I think of all of these is the tricky one, because if you're like the head judge has a job, and their job is to be out there on the floor overseeing what's going on. And at the CrossFit Games, a lot of times there are multiple head judges there. Maybe divide 5 and 5 or 10 and 10, depending on number of athletes in the heat. And if you see the judge in lane 3 that's not upholding the standard, you're supposed to go over there and remind them to uphold the standard, or give them a cue or whatever, so that that athlete is having the same expectations as everyone else. That's fine. If you brief all the judges and then heat 1 goes out there and all 10 of them are not doing it, not judging the way that you want them to judge as the head judge, sometimes it's a short event. Maybe it's 2 minutes. Maybe it's a sprint, bar muscle up sprint with a sled, and it's all over in 2 minutes. And you're like, oh my God, they all got it wrong, whatever it is. If you're the head judge in this instance, I think what the PFAA is asking is say nothing. Let all the men's heats go. Just let those judges screw it up for all of the men. Get them for the women and get it right for them, because otherwise it's not the same test.
I can see that. Yeah. And again, if we get to talk to Brent, and we're trying to get him on, Brent Fikowski, certainly questions we'll ask him. And then we get to 6, clear and specific briefings on minimum work requirements. And obviously this is coming from, we'll call this the Corona rule. And again, at the briefing, at the semifinal briefing, all the athletes were there, and they all got read the same thing regarding the quote unquote spirit of competition rule, and how CrossFit reserves the right to, and I'm paraphrasing, essentially yank you from the competition if you are not quote unquote competing. So to number 6 here, I'm guessing the PFAA just wants that rule to go away, which I think would probably be the best thing, because anytime you leave things up to just sort of a judgment call and you're trying to judge someone's intent and spirit of competition, have that rule go away, and let's just establish clear and specific rules on minimum work requirements, or what will or will not get you removed from a competition.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the tricky part about that is something that I never really liked about the early games was what kept happening to Orlando Trejo, is that he was being tested the same way as everyone else to get there. And then he'd get there, and every event, the first workout was in the water, and he wasn't good at swimming and he couldn't do it. And they were moving him from competition, and then he didn't get to do anything else. And it wasn't because he wasn't trying. It's just that the thing that showed up first every year was the one thing he couldn't do. And so we never got to see him do anything else. And I didn't like that. That's why I think that in a perfect world, what you just described, where there's, 3-round workout, you got to finish 1 round. Like, that sounds great to be able to say, like, okay, everyone met that checkbox, everyone can move on. But at the CrossFit Games, there's so many weird and random things. I mean, you could paint yourself into a corner as CrossFit unintentionally if you say, everyone just has to do 1 pegboard climb, and then 37 of the 40 women do none. What do? You remove them all from the competition? I mean, that's the trouble. So 0 work equals 0 points is my favorite tagline for this conversation. I think that's fine, but you also don't want athletes going out there and being like, that's a real heavy boulder. I'm just going to take a 0 on this and watch everyone else do the work. That's against the spirit of competition. And I don't think that instance is not really a gray area. It's like, what are you doing, man? Like, you're here at the games to try and compete. You need to go out there and try and compete. So I think that, I would be curious again to have Brent's insight into this about what that means and what kind of conversations have been had, because I can see the black and white argument, but there's also these potential problem areas if you introduce strict minimum work requirements on every workout.
Yeah, it does feel like, I don't know, in some shape or form, it does seem like the CrossFit kind of wants it both ways, though. It's like, hey, like we're gonna we want you to come all the way out here and we want you to live up to the spirit of competition, but we're not going to let you finish the competition either. We're going to cut you at some point.
Yeah.
And so not giving them athletes full autonomy to operate within the confines of the competition that they do get to take part in seems a little odd. How do you, I'll go back to another sport. What is, off the top of your head, is there a rule in football, primarily college, that has been the most controversial in terms of its application on the field and whether it fits?
In
Lauren, this is your
college,
area of expertise. Let's go.
I mean,
Flags. I don't know.
Well, no, it's a flag, and it's a contact based.
oh, is this targeting?
Targeting.
Yeah. I was in
Targeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
1,000% targeting, because there's a level of subjectivity to whether or not what targeting is.
Aren't you always targeting the guy with the ball? Like
Technically,
that's you're always
Yes.
like I am targeting that person to tackle him.
Whether
Yeah.
your intent is to harm him or hit him in a
That's
way
the
that is not
problem.
in the spirit of
Mhm.
tackling or whatever, and you're doing so at speed where more often than not the defenders are at a disadvantage to the reaction of what the receiver
Mhm.
is. It's primarily a receiver, defensive back situation. And that's one of the ones that gets the most guff. You understand the intent of the rule
Yeah.
in terms of trying to protect players, but how it's applied is never uniform. And there's always a lot of arguments to whether or not it fits the bill. We may not ever get any clarity beyond what we have now in the spirit of competition rule. And we may have to resign ourselves to saying like, yeah, that
Right.
it passes the sniff test.
It's
or the
like
eye test.
I can't remember the Supreme Court judge who said it. It was about obscenity. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it.
Mhm.
Like you can't define someone who is just tanking, but you're going to probably know it when you see it.
Yeah.
Lauren, I'm going to give you get the last word on this. How would you handle this?
Honestly, I'm going to have to disagree with Brian. If you make it to the CrossFit Games and you can't do something, then like to me, that's just from a spectator and a fan, it's not entertaining. Even if you're incredible at something else, go home and work on your weaknesses.
And I tend to agree with that, Lauren, but then that takes us back to the pegboard. It's like you have to with these athletes, and Dave Castro said it the best. His job when he was programming was to test the athletes, not to showcase them.
Yeah,
So
and
then
I
the onus
agree,
becomes
but
on the
then something like I don't really love having a brand new movement announced at the games. Announce it a month ahead of time. See how good the athletes can get with a couple of weeks practice and then test it there.
That's fair. And you guys addressed this on the latest edition of Death by the way, which everyone should watch because it's very entertaining. But yeah, that becomes you want to introduce new things. You don't want everybody to be able to have
But
an
not
easy
on the
time doing
fly.
it.
Right.
I think there's room for that to some extent.
I don't love like the whole unknown and unknowable. I think like there needs to be more parameters with it because like I want to see the athletes push their capacity and I want to see these incredible moments. And I know that again, it's not a showcase. We're trying to test the fittest, and part of like picking something up on the fly, I think does test athleticism and your level of like fitness and being able to figure it out on the floor. But I just think that you could see better races and a more competitive field if you just gave the athletes a little bit more time for some of these like unknown and unknowable surprises that happen at the games.
Would an example of that then be the pegboard, or you think of another one that would fit that bill?
Well, I think even of the year that we had the freestanding handstand push-ups.
Okay.
2 years ago,
Yeah.
event 14.
Yeah. And but you're also, this is kind of getting back to some of the, I guess, foundations. Like you go back to the 10 general physical skills, and there's a group that, I guess you would call the neurological skills of fitness that are important to test in a way that you can't always just practice them and nail it down. And that's, if you're just focusing on capacity, then you're, in many ways, you're ignoring some of those neurological components that are an important part of what we define as fitness. If that makes sense.
It's an interesting question, because I can see what Lauren is saying on that one, that if you're going to come up with something totally out of left field that no one's ever seen before, is it fair then to say, minimum work requirement, if you can't do it, you're out? Maybe it is. But you eliminate that problem by giving people a little bit of a runway.
Yeah, we'd have to extrapolate that line of thinking to, the qualifying stages of competition too, because at the qualifying stage of competition, are you also going to say, okay, 60 of you made it to semifinals. Second test is muscle ups, whatever, box jumps, pistols with a ruck on, and 100 out of the 600 athletes that took that test got a 0. Should they have just been stopped out and removed from the competition at that point? If so, there's no Sydney Wells at the games this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and that's
a world record on test number 5.
Right. Go ahead, Lauren.
And I don't think that semifinals in the games are apples to oranges. I think that there's a little bit more wiggle room at semifinals, but when you get to the CrossFit Games, I just think that the things that are being tested should be pushing the athletes to their capacity, instead of deciding whether the athletes are going to physically be being able to do the movement or not.
Yeah.
Well, even from a broadcast perspective, if I turn on the television and I see that more than half the field can't complete a task, I'm like, what is this? What is this sport that people say that I should go into a box and try? None of these athletes can do it. This seems silly.
Well, some people might say, wow, I think I could actually do that. Maybe I'm better than them. But then they won't be able, but then they might likely, if they can do that one thing, they might be able to. A rock climber might be able to do a legless pegboard very easily, but he's not going to be able to turn around and finish the back 9 workout. He's going to have no chance. And so that's the balance. And that's the thing that I ultimately don't like about removing someone from a competition that's meant to be a breadth and depth test of a variety of different things. It's the same reason I don't like the cuts. It's like, okay, you were good enough to get here based on the parameters that we set. Let me see you take the test against everyone else. And let me see by the end of the weekend where you actually stack up. And yeah, you might take a last place on something. You might not be able to do one thing. But I still want to see those athletes compete against the rest of the field. And the more and more that years go by, and the more that I study the sport, and specifically the games, it does become quite difficult to assess performance when the size of the field is consistently changing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say, remember, one element, while it may not be the most exciting to see half of the field fail, in many ways, those moments drive training and adaptation within the elite of the sport moving forward, right? And there are times when, let's be honest, there are times when the elite athletes need to get knocked down a peg or two.
No, it's an interesting conversation. There's 2 more sections of this PFAA thing I want to get to. So that was the ones we just listed. That's we all agree on that. This next one is regarding some conditions. CrossFit committed to making every effort to meet the demand. So this is we'll really try our best, but no promises. Those conditions are dry wooden platforms for lifting. Makes total sense why you can't absolutely.
Another Corona one.
That's a really good point, actually. Ability to adjust equipment. Get why that can be an absolute. Pull-up bar / ring heights. Equipment calibration. Get it? Why we want that in there. Test distance consistency.
Most notably, this is the shuttle to overhead A to B argument from last year. They were all running the same distance, but half the field had to move 5 steps further to get to their bar. And because of the way the workout was structured, they felt like it could have cost them a rep per set. 3 reps in that workout could have been 10 places on the leaderboard. So that's one example of where this is coming from.
Right, and that makes total sense. It's if your lanes are staggered, the turnaround point should be staggered, which it was not. Right, they all had the same turnaround point. Okay, so that makes sense. Then we got number 6, consistent heat warm-up time. Brian, I think you alluded to that earlier.
I did. I had kind of grouped it into the equipment scenario. So while they're promising that they can do the have everyone have the same access to equipment. They're not promising that everyone will have the same amount of time. They'll try to do their best. And,
Right.
there are certain things where you could understand this if, for example, on a final heat of a whatever workout that they want to fly the jets in, and that they know that's going to take an extra minute. So the fourth heat might get 1 extra minute that they have to stand around compared to the other heats.
Yeah, or an injury, someone has to be helped off the floor. That could have an effect on that. TV windows could have an effect on that as well. So there are a lot of things that you just can't account for to say, yes, we can absolutely 100% commit to doing that. And then finally, clear and safe movement standards, which
they're saying they're going to make every effort to do this. This is the one of these that I have the same feeling as
I'm
you,
just like,
Sean.
shouldn't that be in the first category?
It makes you raise an eyebrow, doesn't it?
Well, also, like, how you define safe might vary from person to person.
It could be
true.
There's some information that could potentially fall into this category that could be outside of the realm of CrossFit's control, like an undisclosed injury. So they might consider this to be a safe movement, and someone might say, I'm just going to risk it anyway. And then they get hurt and they'll say, well, that wasn't safe. And it's like, well, this person actually took the floor knowing they had a torn bicep. That's not on us. Rough example.
Okay.
You get it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then the final one.
So this is more of
was,
a legal protection little.
Yeah, I think
sentence.
so.
Awesome.
This is like we agree in principle, and in application there might be some extenuating circumstances.
So then the final section is PFAA and CrossFit's views, and then this is in bold, diverge regarding 1, cuts and the impact they have on the sport overall. No shock there that the athletes don't want cuts. I'm with them. I don't like cuts either.
Same.
I think most, yeah. And then 2, multiple risers for shorter athletes. Is that a safety issue that the more you stack on, the more of them you stack, the less stable it becomes? And so if someone were to come down on that, you might risk an injury?
Some of them are a little bit lighter. And if you stack multiple of them on top of each other, because, hey, I'm a short person, if they're not the heavier ones, it will slide when you jump down. So it could be a safety, but I've also used ones that are heavier that don't move when you stack them on top of each other.
Well, and the
So
other
this seems
thing that
strange
I've
to
always
me.
thought about, the other thing I've always thought about with regards to this is, could you just have risers that are different heights? Like you could have a 6, 8, 10, and 12-inch riser, and then you can just use the one you need, and you don't have to stack anything. I'm not sure why.
Do they
so
make
much
are those readily available? Like, is that something that exists?
And do they provide a much more significant obstacle overall in the progress or whatever may happen? I'm not really sure, but I do also think there may be some insurance issues too. We don't ever really talk about that, but certain elements of like obstacles you're having people jump up and off of and utilizing it does change insurance in terms of risk. But
that's probably the most valid and legitimate point that any of us have brought up so far. If that were the case, I feel like CrossFit could communicate that to the athletes, and the athletes could be understanding of that. And the fact that it's still existing in this section makes me wonder if that is actually the contingent that this is depending on or not.
Well, and perhaps it was communicated in whatever meeting they had, and I think that's the overall positive here, is that there was a conversation. There were a lot more areas where they agreed than they disagreed. There are areas where it's like, hey, we'll try our best. So the net positive of this, I think, far outweighs anything bad that you can say about it. Like, there's 2 areas where they disagree: cuts and risers. And if that's where we are right now, I think we're in a pretty good place as far as a relationship between the PFAA and CrossFit and their ability and their willingness to work together.
For the last couple of years, I've heard a lot of people in a variety of different realms that have been like, yeah, I mean, I know the PFAA exists, but what impact are they really having? And now, and I think this is a testament in large part, and I know that there are a big group of people that are supportive of this and have been supportive of this initiative, but at the forefront, it's mostly been Fikowski and Vellner that have been leading the charge to continue to try to find a way to have these conversations result in meaningful communication and change from CrossFit with regards to athlete safety and fairness of competition play. So big credit to those guys. And I do think that overall you have to say this is a positive.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, also like look
I
at the
agree.
temperature of the times, right? Like we live in an instant gratification world, like this, any element of athletes organizing and attempting to make change is going to be chipping away at a very large piece of granite. And the full sculpture isn't going to come into picture for quite some time. But we're starting to see at least some of the fruits of that labor. And it's going to continue to take long efforts and, a decent amount of time for more of this to come.
All right. That's all the stuff we had to get to.
Can I just say one other thing about
Go
the PFAA? The
sure.
PFAA in general, I'm looking here at their Instagram. They have 2,500 people following them. In addition to this, they've put out this like 5-part Now What series. That's a recommendation based on years and years and decades of experience that some of these athletes have of what to do if your season ended at semifinals. So any athletes out there that are listening that aren't following these guys, the last slide on this most recent one said more to come. I think this is a place where you're going to start to see more and more information that's extremely relevant to athletes, valuable for people like us who work in the space to be aware of, and potentially also of interest, if nothing else, for fans of the sport. So I think that we should probably try to push some more people, in this direction, because it seems like they're getting more and more stuff out there that's actually usable and meaningful for those variety of different groups.
Yeah, and your point, Brian, people are like, well, what good are they doing? Well, if you're not paying attention to what they are doing, you might not know. And this is a good way to stay up to date on everything they are trying to do. It's right there in front of you. So go follow the PFAA on Instagram. Community support. You got any?
Nope.
All right. Pass on community support. That brings us right to PRs and no reps. Who wants to start with their no rep? I can start. You want me to start?
Yeah, go
I'll
for it.
start. I'm going to no rep. I don't know the name of the song, but
Oh boy.
I'm tired of it. Every time, I've said 3 times a day, scrolling through Instagram, someone sticks this song on their reel. And it's like a spaghetti stain on a white shirt. You're going to work a long time to get that out of your mind.
Which song?
It's that, I got to look it up. It's the,
I'm muting you so I can't hear it.
that's it. That's the one. That's it. That one. No,
yes. Okay, Sean, that's because
I'm
that's how
tired of
the
it.
algorithm works. The more people that use it, the more people that see the reel.
Can we just stop for a day? I'm tired of that song.
No, it's gonna keep going.
It just gets lodged in there, and I can't get it out of my head. No rep, whatever that
It's
song
an
is.
earworm.
Let's all just stop, just for a day. Just give it a break. All right.
Sean's gonna lose his mind.
I have spoken.
Oh man,
Tommy, you're up.
All right, I got 2. One of which I posted to my Instagram. I drove by a Prius with a spoiler on it.
Oh,
on my
yeah,
window
that was
I
wiper
saw
yesterday.
that. That makes no sense.
Oh my god,
That is the ultimate definition of wishful thinking.
It is. It is dressed for the job you want. I'm also no repping the heat wave that the world has been in. Did you see in the Persian Gulf? They had 152 heat index.
What?
152 heat index. When they were like, "Hey, it's 75, but it feels like 78." No, it feels like 152. It was 104 degrees Fahrenheit, but it had a 90% humidity.
Oh,
that is. Oh man, that's like.
ain't no one got time for that.
Man, you're feeling the heat. That's like walking into Costco on a Sunday after church. That thing is just packed to the nines. They're serving up hot pizzas left and right. But yeah, it's I'm gonna no rep that. Also in I think Death Valley, it hit 130.
I saw that.
Yep. So
I was in Sacramento yesterday. It was 110.
Yep.
That was bad.
I like the sun. Not that much sun.
No. Lauren, no rep.
I'm going to no rep the fires and Mother Nature that are ruining the air quality and making me choke on my own breath when I go outside.
Yeah, it's bad. We had that a couple of years ago.
Yep. Welcome to California.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah, it's no joke.
That's terrible. Brian.
I'm going to use a very specific personal example to no rep a larger concept. And the larger concept is being lazy. And the
All right.
The specific example is the setup of this apartment building that I moved into. There was some serious storms here that shut down some of the electrical stuff. And the elevators are not working. There's only 3 floors on the building. I always try to take the stairs. You cannot get to the stairs from inside the building. You have to go out. I couldn't walk out on my... No, you have to go out and around to get to the stairs. And this, to me, I was just like, what? So many people don't even think to take the stairs these days. That the designers of these buildings didn't even have them. I don't get it. So anyway, take the stairs. It's an easy way to get a little bit extra exercise.
Exactly. I love doing it at the airport when everyone's just like lining up for the escalator and I'm just flying up the stairs, you know?
Oh, it's a personal challenge.
People are looking at me like, what is that? It's like, what is that person doing?
Drink it in, ladies and gentlemen. I'm
climbing up 2 flights of stairs. He's a madman.
Oh man, I'm triple staring it too, you know.
I'm skipping ones and
putting these long legs to work.
Maybe, doing the
Tommy, you're not even going to your max potential.
I know. Although I will say that did come back to bite me one time because I was barely going to make a connection to Spain for the Fittest Freakish Challenge. Ooh. And I was like, watch this. I'm going to run up these stairs 3 at a time. Took a digger, buried my knee, and showed up to an airplane sweaty and covered in blood. So dang.
All right. Which is usually how you go through the airline experience in general.
Exactly.
PRs. I'm going to PR pleasant customer service experiences because I feel like just overall customer service in today's world has gone down significantly. Like it's such an old person thing to complain about. But yeah, like I had 2 very pleasant customer service experiences. One at a hardware store, and one yesterday I had to go to an Apple store, and it was great. Everyone was super nice.
These are both in-person examples. I was going to be very surprised if you had a telecommunication positive customer service experience.
No, that's rare.
Never.
Let's not get too over our skis.
Even
here.
in person, it seems like, anyway. It's always nice to have good customer service. So PR, if you're out there, in person doing the Lord's work with good customer service.
Well, speaking of the Lord's work, my PR is natural family planning. I don't know if you heard, but former NFL quarterback Phillip Rivers and his wife are expecting their 10th kid. Yeah. 10th kid.
Oh, do they own a farm?
No, and they're not like an Irish Catholic family from the 1920s. 10th kid.
There's something I want to say. I just think it's appropriate.
Just watching Sean right now is amazing.
Yeah.
Do they have a picture of their house? Where do you?
Well, they have the resources. It's not like you didn't have the resources to take care of them. He's rich.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Plenty of money.
Yeah, I mean, they announced. Yeah, he married his middle school sweetheart. Lovely. After his freshman year of college at NC State. And then, I think they were actually not planning on this one, but this one just came, and there's
is that one kid for every playoff game they lost in the last minute?
Yeah, there we go.
I'm going to call you 3-point lead with 2 minutes and 40 seconds left.
Oh man, I'm gonna. Dad, how did I get my name? Well. Listen up, AFC Championship backbreaking loss.
Okay. So that was our PR. All right, Lauren, PR.
Okay, I'm going to PR my friend Pat Comeray, who recently opened up his own CrossFit affiliate.
All right. Congratulations, Pat.
Yep. In good old Syracuse, New York. And I now coach at that gym. And It's just really great, community-based. And so far it's been very successful. So congrats to Pat.
That's great. All right, Brian, PR.
Perfect segue, Lauren. Excellent job into my PR. I had the experience this week of retaking the level 1 this past weekend.
Oh, nice.
Oh, where did you do it?
I took the level 1 at CrossFit Charlotte, where I'm coaching now.
Nice.
But I took the level 1 for the first time 5 or 6 years ago now. and I had let it expire. I didn't re-up it. I moved down here to Charlotte, and Andy Hendel owns CrossFit Charlotte. He's been an affiliate owner for 17 years. And he's like, come on, you got to get your level 1. And I was like, yeah, that's fair. So signed up for the course, went and took it. Andy was part of coaching the course. Joe DeGain was there, 15-year affiliate owner. Spencer Hendel was there. And then Andy's son-in-law, Luke Burton, was the fourth member of the staff. Combined, like, a crazy number of years in experience there. And although it's changed a little bit, some small ways since 6 years ago when I took it, because I know so much more about CrossFit, the methodology, the sport, the evolution, all these components of it. For me, it was actually as great as the first one was. This was much better. And I just wanted to kind of commend and PR those guys for continuing to put on a super high quality event. And especially for those that have been doing it for a really long time and still do it with a ton of passion, expertise, and care about the experience that the members of the course are getting.
You really do get your money's worth when you go to one of those things. Like the level of the amount of knowledge and the ability for the red shirts to communicate that and make it relatable, I think is second to none. They're all phenomenal at their job. So yeah, huge. I'll double that PR. I'll double stamp the triple stamp.